All right, folks, let's see what's happening in the world on this particular day. And I may have a clip of an interview that I did earlier with a gentleman that is involved with Chinese studies and all along those lines. And I know that Lee Newton Rhodes may find some of his comments interesting, and I'll see if I can't pull those up. But let's also first just talk about what's happening in the world in general. There was that mercenary rebellion that went on in Russia, and apparently, there are some feelings that Vladimir Putin may be in trouble internally. So we're going to see how this all plays out. And of course, there is definitely a history of various failed rebellions there in Russia and all along those lines. But definitely, folks are definitely wondering about this truce that apparently Putin and Prigozhin have put in effect and all in that way. And apparently, the Russian leaders are trying to reassert control after that mercenary rebellion. So we're going to see how this all plays out and how it plays out in the war in Ukraine as well. And by the way, in other news items, Myanmar is burning $446 million worth of seized drugs as illicit trade booms in Southeast Asia. So I did see that that story was going on. And of course, there's elections, not just here in the United States, but around the world. So the Guatemala elections are heading for a runoff. The leftists are in the lead amid voters' anger in that particular region and in that particular election. Now, I do know that the Greeks have the opposite. It looks like the conservatives have claimed a resounding victory in Greece. So there is definitely some things that are going on in that space, and some people are saying that Southern Europe is swinging to the right. And a New Zealand leader's plane is so prone to breakdowns, he takes a backup on a Chinese trip. And apparently, the Australian High Court is dismissing Russia's bid for injunctions to halt its embassy's eviction. And Germany is ready to put 4,000 soldiers permanently in Lithuania. So they are ready to station 4,000 troops in that particular area. And in Germany, the far right AFD won its first governing post as well. So that is a historic victory in local vote there. And China is continuing with a weakened Putin after the Wagner mutiny and all in that space. And U.S. aircraft carriers are making Da Nang port calls as America looks to strengthen its ties with Vietnam. And apparently, Biden and Zelensky held a phone call about recent events in Russia, according to some reports out of the White House. So we are seeing that. And Egypt and India are bolstering ties as Modi makes his first trip to Cairo. I know he just recently made a trip to the United States, but he was recently making a trip to Cairo, and the Egypt president is giving highest honors to the visiting Indian prime minister as those ties continue to improve. And Saudi Arabia is sending its top delegation to China's summer Davos. So that is something that is going on the world area as well. We're going to get to a couple of things that are taking place in the news in terms of U.S. news, and we might see some other things that are going on in the world as well. But let's see what's happening in U.S. news that I might want to talk about. Of course, they are still launching the investigation. The U.S. Coast Guard is into that Titan sub implosion, which was definitely a horrible disaster and all in that way. And by the way, I know that sometimes on this show we have talked about those in the LGBTQIA community, and apparently there is a candidate in Delaware that might be the first trans member of Congress. So that is something that we are seeing in the news as well, that Sarah McBride may be the first trans member to get a Congress seat. We'll see what happens in that regards. But Sarah McBride announced a congressional bid on Monday, and that would make them the country's first transgender member of Congress if she is elected. It is clear that diversity in government is necessary for us to not just ensure we have a healthy democracy, but also to truly deliver for people, she told the News Journal in an interview which was published on Monday. So that is something that I'm seeing. And also, we are seeing the storms that are going on and all in that space. I think we may be getting some bad weather here in North Carolina. Had some not that long ago, nothing that was catastrophic, but there was definitely some torrential rains, and there might be some more of that coming from a different hurricane system. But in Johnson County, there was a tornado that hit, and apparently they're saying that there was some major damage in that area of Indiana. So we are seeing that is a story that is going on, and Port Miami is reopening to cruise ships after a sunken boat was raised after a fatal ferry collision. So that's something that we're seeing. And in terms of bad weather, they are saying that multiple tornadoes confirmed as severe weather threats continue for much of the country. Deadly storms move toward the East Coast after spawning tornadoes in the Midwest, and possible severe thunderstorms could bring lightning, damaging wind, and large hail to Metro Detroit. So that is some of the things that I am seeing in the news. I know the other thing that I saw that sometimes people get concerned about is Uber and Lyft, and apparently a woman allegedly shoots her Uber driver, thinking that he had kidnapped her and I guess was taking her to a destination that she didn't want to go to. So we'll be following that story as well. And Biden is to announce $42 billion to expand high-speed internet access. I do know that this whole notion of a digital divide is something we hear about oftentimes, and definitely it'll be interesting to see what happens in that regards. And by the way, Trump is being honored by Republicans as the man of the decade in a Michigan county. And he has also said that the electric vehicle push will mean the decimation for the Michigan industry. And I'm pretty sure he's talking about the car industry in that particular case. So we're getting ready to get into some other news and get into some commentary from my fellow analysts and everything. Lee might be interested in this one. I'd say that a skull found by a California hunter in 1991 has been identified through DNA as the remains of a missing 4-year-old. So it looks like they may have solved a over, 91 to 2023. That is definitely an over 30-year case that may have been solved by DNA and all along those lines. So I'm going to bring in Lee Newton Rhodes. He heard about some of the things that I was talking about. He heard me talking about some of those items that were in the news and everything. I see we've got Jacoby with us, and also Sasha Starr. As I said, I had the pleasure not that long ago of interviewing Mr. Bradley, James Bradley, who I think was involved with the Tale of Iwo Jima, that movie. It was actually based on, I believe he said it was his father and all in that space, but he has now done research on China. So I may play a clip of that interview sometime doing this in a particular newscast, and we'll see if folks have any thoughts about what he was saying in the sense of how we're handling business with China and what Mr. Blinken did when he went on his visit. But I don't know if there was anything that you had in mind that you wanted to respond to. So among the news stories that I brought in present, or I can bring up that interview at some point as well. But definitely glad to see you, Lee. I know that Jacoby's here as
Good morning,
well.
Mark. I just have a general question about China. Over the years, since Nixon, I guess to today, we've been more engaging in China as accepting them as a business partner. Has that worked out well in terms of preventing a war with them, making them less aggressive?
Not at all. And that's actually one of the things that Mr. Bradley was talking about. So I'm glad you brought that up. So let's see what he had to say about that. If I can pull up this lovely clip and all along those lines, because like I said, it was an interesting interview, about an hour-long interview that I did over the weekend, because he is living, I believe, in Saigon. So of course they are in a whole different time zone. So I had to pick a time that I could do it that would also be conducive to him as well. So I think it was probably like 9 in the morning where he was, because it was 8 p.m. where I was and everything. But definitely he is an older gentleman, and we're going to see some of his remarks and all along those lines. And we'll see what folks have to say about what he said and all in that space. So I think that might have been the wrong one that I picked and all along those lines. No, that might be the right one, but I'll see in a second and see if we can pull it up, what his comments were and what he said in that space. So definitely it was an interesting conversation, and we're going to see if I can't get the particular video that I was looking for so we can have his comments about China, because he definitely did say some things about that nature of what you just said, about whether it was going to be a fair situation or not. So we're going to see if we can't pull that up and get that comments going and all along those lines and in that space. But why were you saying that as I pulled this particular one up? Because he also has some interesting things to say about the nature of not just our relationship, but the Silk Road, and the fact that China and India together are really the major world powers is one of the things that he was bringing up in his conversation. But I was just wondering why you made the comment that you just made about how it was working out and in that space.
I saw an article this weekend, and I don't remember where I saw it, talking exactly to that point. I think us going over there in our manufacturing and whatever our other businesses and to China has been very beneficial to the Chinese people. But I don't think it's changed the attitude of the Chinese government in terms of world domination and in terms of being the aggressors. I mean, now we have them going over to Cuba, coming over to the Western Hemisphere. So I don't think it's working out well overall. We're basically funding them, helping their economy at the expense of our own economy.
Yep, that's the point that Mr. Bradley was making. And like I said, I'm trying to pull that up and everything in those kind of lines and all in that space. But yeah, that was something that he was bringing up as well. So if you hold on one second, I'm still trying to get that up and running so that we can hear about that. And while I am doing that, I'm going to bring up none other than Jatovi and see what some of Jatovi's thoughts are about the Chinese relationships are as well. So how are you doing, Jatovi? And how is the day going today? I know we've been having that lovely rain over the last several days, even though yesterday it wasn't as much rain, but it might be some more on the way here in the Bull City of Durham.
I mean, it was warm yesterday. I'm just sitting right now and trying to stop and pick up some stuff from CVS, actually, watching people get out of their cars because the line is moving slow. Well, actually, one individual get out of his car to yell at the people at CVS as if that was going to make things go better or go faster. But, just enjoying my time here.
Speaking of which, how do you feel about, as I'm pulling up this article of this clip and everything, how do you feel about that? Because I've heard some people complain that maybe because of the pandemic, because of other things, our notion of customer service and respect of the worker isn't as good as it used to be. So as you were over there in that space, and maybe there are some people getting impatient and all along those lines, in your mind, has the pandemic made it worse, and now that we're getting out of it, even maybe a little bit differently worse? But I'm just wondering your thoughts about that, because I have heard some people that oftentimes complain that they don't get good customer service, and also that they expect more than maybe they should be getting from their people that they are getting their services from, whatever those services may be.
I mean, I don't think it was truthfully the pandemic that caused that. I mean, the pandemic put us in a position where we had to depend on others a lot more. People weren't used to doing that. And we then had an individual that pushed in that they were entitled, which made the whole group feel that they were entitled. Therefore, you began to have problems in that manner as well. So I don't think it was the pandemic per se, but it was the attitudes that were being permeated through our society that told people you're entitled, and if you're not treated as a god, or if you're not bowed down upon, then you should yell at, or it is always yours. This is all about me. And we started forgetting about we started forgetting about us. And so, yeah, again, I don't think it was the pandemic per se, more so than the views that got permeated throughout society, and we're still having to battle that currently. So,
yeah. And I did find that clip, so we're going to bring that clip up and all along those lines, and we'll hear what Mr. Bradley had to say about our relationship with none other than Vietnam. And like I said, he was definitely involved in that space, was raised and got educated overseas and all in that space, but he had some interesting views. So let's hear what Mr. Bradley had to say, Mr. James Bradley. Everything. What is your thoughts about this particular trip and all along those lines? Because I know that a lot of people, and I kind of alluded to it, have thought that China is exerting its power as a global power, and we know that sometimes we hear about old colonialism, and some people might even argue that that is what China is doing, the way that it is, investing in places both in the U.S. as well as around the world. Africa comes to mind, but Asia comes to mind as well. But what are your thoughts about the Chinese intentions, for lack of a better term?
Well, the Chinese intentions, let's just measure it by world popularity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if someone is voted most popular in high school, they must be popular.
Okay.
And you might not like that person, but a lot of people do. If you look at the world right now, they're turning towards Beijing. They're turning away from Washington. They're turning away from the dollar. They're turning away from the U.S. military. And they're turning towards Beijing, the BRICS, the Silk Road. People are signing up for this, and it's not getting enough coverage in the United States. You know, Biden goes to a meeting and 7 guys show up. Putin calls a meeting and 97 countries come. So the tectonic plates are shifting. And in terms of Blinken's trip to China, the U.S. press said that he was going to China to help repair U.S.-China relations. I'm sorry to report to the Americans that Blinken went to the wrong country. You know, you've got to buy him some GPS or maps. If he wanted to repair U.S.-China relations, he should have gone to the United States. He should have gone to TV studios in New York and Washington. The problem is in the American mind. When Blinken came to Beijing, the Chinese said, hey, all this war over Taiwan, Taiwan's part of China. You guys agreed to this 52 years ago with Henry Kissinger and Nixon. Kissinger's 100 years old. It's been your policy since the 1970s. But if you watch CNN or MSNBC, you get the idea that Taiwan's a separate country. No, Taiwan's part of China, like Wisconsin's part of the United States. So Blinken, your idiotic press is misleading America. We want you to get in front of the microphone and just restate American policy. So Blinken goes out and says, Taiwan is part of China. And listen to this. Senator Marshall Blackburn says, Blinken flew to communist China to appease Xi and state that the Biden administration does not support Taiwan's independence. When is this administration going to stand up to bullies and stand up for freedom? I mean, this is ridiculous. Blinken was only saying what American policy is, but this shows you how Americans are being misinformed. They're being told Taiwan is a separate country, which it is not. It is part of China, and we have acknowledged that for 52 years.
Well, along those same lines, I know a lot of times when people think of China, they think about its influences. Like I mentioned earlier, I know that China has definitely been going to a lot of African nations, and it seems like they're investing in those nations. Even here in the United States, you will oftentimes hear about people that are looking at some of the Chinese corporations and buildings in the United States and everything along those lines. So I know that some of my conservative friends are sometimes concerned about that, but what are your thoughts? Is that something that we should be worried about if people are buying land, even here in the United States, from Chinese companies buying land as well as buying them in the African nations, the Latin American nations, the Asian nations, the various nations in the various continents?
That's completely up to America. America has its own laws. They can encourage foreign investments. They can, if American laws encourage you to buy land in America and you're getting rich, why wouldn't you buy land in America?
Right.
I mean, America can take care of its own border. They can, I don't get that one. If I'm a billionaire and I want to buy a farm in the United States and it's legal, what's wrong with that?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's what a lot of folks need to be doing. And like I said, I know that some folks have been feeling that China is exerting undue influences on other countries. But I'm kind of like you. I'm like, if you are a developing nation and you have a resource, whether that is lithium, as is the case in some African nations, or whether that's oil, because I actually know somebody from Uganda that has her own oil company and everything, and the folks in China want to buy your merchandise, then it seems logical that you would want to sell to those that want to buy whatever you are selling, whatever that product may be, particularly since you may be a developing nation. Mm-hmm.
But let's make it real simple. Let's take Africa. Let's take Africa over, let's say, the last 30 years. America's approach to Africa has been to go into the government and say, don't you have some terrorists somewhere out there in the bush? What you need is an American base. You need American drones. You need military guys. And we're going to build a base, and you're going to buy arms from America, and we're going to militarize this. And our outreach to America has been mostly militaristic through AFRICOM. The way China did it is, China, you want to go to Africa, and I mean, go ahead. And Chinese walked over to Africa and said to the Africans, what do you need? Shirts, bras, tennis shoes, sunglasses, cell phones. What do you need? You need cell phones and glasses and candy. And okay, we'll open a shop, and we'll import things from my aunt in China and put them on the shelves and charge you for it. And, they started out as small entrepreneurs. And now Africa and China, that's the number one trading relationship with Africa is China. Why isn't that the United States? Why didn't American entrepreneurs go to Africa and ask them what they wanted? It's the same thing with the Japanese. I'm old enough to remember when there were not Toyotas in America. Toyota came over, and people don't remember the first Toyotas were a failure. They didn't work in the American market. So Toyota did interviews with America. What don't you like about Toyotas? What do you like? What would you like improved? They went back to Japan. They improved the product. Let's try again. That didn't work. 3 years of failure. Okay, how about this? How about that? And finally, they made a car good for the American market, trial by error. How come we're not selling cars in Japan? How come we're not selling cars in Munich and all over Africa like the Chinese are? So, this is an entrepreneurial situation that America has fallen down on. The African countries are not being bamboozled and controlled by debt bondage, as the American press is saying. The Africans have free choice who they're going to deal with, and they want to deal with China. And, I'm not promoting China. I'm an American. I wish Wisconsin entrepreneurs had walked over to Africa and said, what the hell do you want? And we will supply it. We'll make it. We'll make a factory to make it. And we will become Africa's largest trading partner. And Wisconsin will get rich trading with Africa. But we didn't do that.
Any thoughts about Mr. Bradley, some of his thoughts about China and what was going on in that space? But that is the interview. And like I said, he had some other comments, including those about the Ukrainian war and the Silk Road and the power that exists between India and China and the billions of people that they have. And hopefully we'll air more of that interview later on the network and everything. But Lee, you brought it up. So any thoughts about Mr. Bradley's thoughts? And he is somebody that has been in that space of dealing with a lot of Asian countries over the course of his life and everything. And like I said, I did the interview earlier because he was literally in, I believe in Saigon or somewhere in that general area and everything. But definitely any thoughts to his comments?
I just have one thought, and so I think I agree with Jacoby. Jacoby said in the chat that China and Taiwan are separate. Taiwan are separate, and that was my understanding also. But Mr. Bradley said that our policy for 52 years has been that Taiwan is a part of China. What is it? What is our policy?
Oh, Joey disappeared. But like I said, I think this. But my understanding is there has been some confusion about that policy because there are some folks that will say that we are doing the whole separate thing and that Taiwan is a separate nation ever since the division between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek and all along those lines. But there are others that have said that I guess we're trying to maybe appease China or whatever in that way. But it'll be interesting to think of what it is. But definitely that is the case. And by the way, the full name is Jim Bradley is his full name. And like I said, his dad was involved in that making of the Iwo Jima movie. So, I mean, that was actually his dad, I think, or I don't think it was his granddad. I think it was the dad. There was the featured part in that movie and they discovered some of those. So he jokingly said at the beginning that he did not play the role because of his good looks and everything in that space. So he made a joke about that.
Yeah. Mark, are you saying our policy is fluid? We don't really have a policy?
Isn't our policy fluid in a lot of things?
But either we have a policy. Either Taiwan is part of China or it's not. It can't be both. It shouldn't be depending on who's in power. Or maybe it is because it's very political.
I think it's a very political hotbed and a political ball that they throw up in the air and all in that space. So I do think that sometimes it is not as concrete as we would like it to be and everything. And I do think that part of it is the politics of who's in control and all in that space. And I don't think that should be the case, but unfortunately, I think it is the case in a number of cases. You also heard me earlier today in the news talking about how certain countries are glad that they're leaning to the left. Certain countries are glad that they're leaning to the right. And, those kind of like go with the winds of time as well. So like the country that is more left right now, I think that was Guatemala that I referenced and everything. They may be swinging to the right later on. And the same with Germany and the other country that I mentioned that are leaning to the right now. So they may lean to the left at some point. So it does seem like it flows with the course of time.
Mark, I think this is people's frustration with politics in general, even in the United States, that politicians, their policies depend upon who's in power, not that they have core convictions. For example, the border, our southern border. If you go back and listen to what Obama said, Schumer, you just pick whoever you want. What they said was different. Clinton, when he was in office, what they said is different than what they're saying now, or what they said under Trump. They just changed their policy, whether they're in the party in power or they're not. And I think Americans are frustrated with that. And I think the world is frustrated with that. Have core convictions, regardless of whether your guy's in power or not. And we don't see that, and it's a shame, and it's very sad. But I think maybe that's what's going on with Taiwan. Is why should that be any different?
Yep, and that may be part of what is going on is that confusion and everything in that space. And apparently, I was just looking up in an article, the China-Taiwan conflict, and apparently as of last year, in what was known as the One China policy, Washington recognized the PRC as the sole legitimate government of China. It also acknowledged Beijing's position that Taiwan is part of China. So apparently that is something that is out there, and there are even divisions. I know that sometimes Sasha talks about the UN, and there are countries that recognize Taiwan, and there are other countries that don't recognize Taiwan as being a legitimate separate country, and all in that space. And I'm sure that's
Mark. At the beginning of the podcast, I mentioned, in terms of us appeasing the CCP, is it making war more or less likely? I put the reference over there in the chat. It was actually a 22-minute podcast by Gordon Chang, who's extremely knowledgeable, and he's a good go-to source on China. His views on that. It's worthwhile if you have the 22 minutes offline.
Okay, I'll definitely try to check those out. We've got Sasha here, see what Sasha's got to say about China's relationship. But I did have a question for Sasha as well, because it looks like Putin has got some serious troubles going on. The Wagner Group apparently marched on him, and apparently there may be some days that he is numbered, and it might not even be from the Ukrainians. It may be internal. So I was just wondering your thoughts about that, Sasha. Apparently they came up with some sort of agreement, and some sort of agreement that's like a treaty between the Wagner Group and the Putin camp. But is this going to help us end the war quickly? And all along those lines, and were you surprised that the Wagner Group made this offensive on Putin and Moscow, or did we expect to see more of this later on and everything?
I'm not a big fan of Wagner Group, Prigozhin, and so on. However, in the last 2 days, they exposed absolutely fantastic vulnerability of Russian state. And from now on, Putin is getting out of this conflict, is very weak. I was listening to his speech where he claimed that Prigozhin is traitor and he should be tried and punished for what he's done and so on. And then he made a peace with him. And apparently he had only 2,500 people or so. With 2,500 people, you cannot take over the Moscow or Russia, I believe. So this is completely bizarre situation. Prigozhin, for all practical purposes, is gone. It's finished, even if he's not going to be killed by Putin. So maybe he will be able to disappear to Africa, where he is proliferating. And gentleman, before I was listening that he was talking something about Africa. This man doesn't understand what he's talking about. He just does not understand. He does not understand also what he's talking about China and Taiwan. What's the difference between North Korea and South Korea situation and Taiwan and China? Doesn't he understand North Korea and South Korea are two independent states? So what's the difference between China and Taiwan? Are two independent states, completely different policies, different people. Everything is different. So what do you want to say? Taiwan is a part of China. You must be a fool even to say something like that. I hope.
Well, like I said, another one thing that he talked about several times, and like I said, hopefully we'll get a chance to play more of the interview on Pod TV, but he did talk about the power of the Asian nations combined, and he did mention BRICS in the conversation, but he also talked about what he called, I think it was the Island of Straits or something like that, but it's basically India and China combined along with
This is garbage. All these BRICS, non-BRICS, China, India, all that is garbage because none of these countries are even close in any shape or form, economy, political-wise, or anything to United States, the Western Europe, Japan, South Korea as well, and Japan. They're not even close in any case. So all they can is say yap about the American imperialism, and this is this, and that is that, and let's talk about BRICS or so. They're all fighting for political appointments with BRICS, so to milk BRIC for some money for their appointments and flying around and so on. It's nothing. It's complete bullshit. I'm sorry to say so. I was in Africa once. I know what it is. It will take 555 years to develop so it could be a tradable nation, so US can move in and trade and do something positive. But it's definitely not there and will not be there for a long, long time. So if China wants and is interested to get in and get some rare metals or so on, okay, go ahead. So China will deal behind the closed doors with Putin and Prigozhin and all the thugs. And China can do it. United States can't. United States just unable to deal with thugs. Because to deal with thugs, you have to act as a thug. and think as attack. And if you can do it, okay. I don't think that US or US companies can do it.
Hey, Sasha and Jacoby, two things. One, it seems to me that I have heard of several nations within the African continent, because Africa is definitely a multi-country continent, and there are some like Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, a few others, including some that are on the northern side. I believe Qatar is technically in Africa as well. That they are definitely some different levels of what is going on. So I don't know that you can say that all of Africa can't be developed, because there are definitely some developed nations that are doing quite well in Africa. Like I said, Nigeria definitely comes to mind. There are some other ones as well. And one of Mr. Bradley's arguments, and I'd love to hear from Jacoby's thoughts about what I just said, as well as yours, Sasha, is that we have spent too much time on our military development. You heard his reference to the fact that we send the generals and the other people down there, and we're not doing enough actual business development between the U.S. and the African continent. And that's just one example. We'd also say the U.S. and our neighbors to the south in Latin America and everything. And that may be where we need to concentrate, because he put it, there is definitely, that is one of the largest trade routes that exist between China and Africa at this particular point. So, Jacoby, any thoughts? And maybe Sasha's got some thoughts on what I just said as well.
I mean, any business relationship helps out tremendously. I mean, in all honesty, that's one thing that we're complaining that's going on with China, is that, hey, well, China's trying to take over the world. They're doing all these blah, blah, blah trades and so on and so forth. Well, we are in a global, as much as people want to fight against it, we're in a global economy. We're in a global space. So we've got to figure out ways to work with these other countries, and business development is the big thing. So, yeah, I mean, sending in, yes, there are the different militias within the continent of Africa that we have to deal with. But again, we have to send in that business development and that the diplomatic relations to build those countries up, to work with those countries, because that's the way of the future. I mean, wars are just only destruction.
Yeah.
Well,
Sasha.
If China is willing, for political or any other consideration, to invest their time and money to develop African countries, nobody can forbid them doing so. So they are going ahead, they're investing time and money, building something there, and that's fine. That's fine. So after a certain period of time, if Chinese are successful, they will build some kind of economy which would be then enable Americans to move in, because Americans are not going to trade with unsophisticated Chinese stuff. American doesn't produce that and cannot compete with China in that respect. But to send and trade with some sophisticated stuff, almost any consumer goods, anywhere from cars to clothes to just anything, then America can do quite well there. But African infrastructure is not there to enable doing so. And America cannot and should not build an infrastructure in Africa, because private companies are not going to do that. So we are talking about the government of the United States. Forget about all the potholes and completely useless American infrastructure, which is aging, which is falling apart. And all of a sudden, okay, hell with American infrastructure. We are going to build African infrastructure. Where do you see that happen? It's not going to happen. So American government is not moving there for obvious reasons. American companies will not move there for same obvious reasons. That's the end of story. Let Chinese work and build something there, because China is not motivated by economic consideration. They have a lot of political consideration, which America does have none. So then let do China, go, come on, invest, build, do so for the next 55 years. And then if they are successful, I'm not sure that they will be successful, but maybe they will. So then America will come in, and the job is already done. So now we can come in, we can start trading and so on. So America In a way, you can accuse America of being selfish, pragmatic, but America always been so. It's the same thing with Taiwan and China. 50 years ago, it made sense to say, oh, China and Taiwan is the same country, same people, or so on. 50 years ago, it suits America to say so, and it did. Oh, 50 years later, it's no longer the case. Taiwan Semiconductor Company is worth so much, is producing semiconductors for all high-tech sector in the world, if you say, even for companies like Nvidia and others, or so on. So, is America going to bring that on a plate to China and say, China, take it, it's yours? No, that's not going to happen. America is too pragmatic country to allow that. It doesn't matter what Nixon said, what Kissinger says, and who knows if Kissinger will leave until 150, he'll say something else 50 years later, but that doesn't make sense. America is very pragmatic and selfish country, and it will do the same thing what will benefit America first and everybody else second and third.
Well, I mean, that's the goal of every country, from China to everywhere
Agree.
else.
Agree.
And so I disagree that U.S. countries or U.S. companies won't invest in Africa. As a matter
No.
of fact, in
No way.
2015, in 2015, U.S. companies had invested over $48 billion in Africa. So the U.S. market sees that, well, the U.S. companies see that as an untapped market already, and it's only growing from there. So the big thing is that if it's a growing population and as a country develops, it's obvious. I mean, even in there's an article here, 2002, U.S. companies should be looking at Africa for outsourcing, and there are already companies looking at Africa for manufacturing. So you've got tons of things happening. It just needs to happen more because it is an untapped market. By allowing another country to create a whole economy, and then we assume, America assumes that, hey, we can just swoop in at the end and save the day or take over that economy. It's impossible. That it's not going to happen, because if that economy is already dependent upon, say, for example, that's like us swooping in to the British Isles and taking over the British Isles and using our economy because that's what the British Isles wants, but that's not where they're doing. Or even in Canada, well, we can swoop into Canada because, we can take over, and instead of them using the loony and the toonie in the British market or the British economy, no, we're going to sweep in and use the U.S. economy. It doesn't work that way. So whatever gets established there is going to be established. So if China takes the market and takes over China and creates an economy there, they're going to be dependent upon the Chinese economy and not come in and say, hey, well, now the Americans are here. We're going to use the dollar. And that's not reality. So at this moment, as people are seeing that Africa is an untapped market, yeah, people are swooping over there. And that's what should happen.
I'll tell you from my personal experience that Africa is absolute. I'm not even talking about any particular country. It's overall extremely corrupted territory. You cannot do even a small thing without corruption. I remember, I will not say the name of the country, but I was in one African country with geologists working on certain project too. And so we were in the Ministry of Natural Resources of that country. And I wanted to see the map where the certain property was located. And they say, well, it's impossible because if somebody who is responsible for the maps is not here and it will take a while. And we were there only for 5 days. So to spend 3-4 days waiting for that person. So our interpreter explained, because, they spoke other language than English. But I'm pretty sure they understood English just as well, but it doesn't matter, the name of the game. So he suggested, listen, give them $100 and you will have the map instantly. So I gave him $100 and in 5 minutes there was a map. They didn't wait for that person who is authorized to use maps. No, it was done instantly. The other problem was that, that was an old, falling apart map made by Soviet geologists in 1962. And it was and it had only one piece of this map. They didn't have any copies. And it was falling apart. So I asked if we can make copies, photocopies, at least to have where it's all. They said, no, we cannot do it because there is no electricity. The Ministry of Natural Resources didn't have electricity. That's what we are talking about. Go, Americans, make money there. It's a fantastic place. Good luck. I've done my part.
So Sasha, I'm not sure about the anecdote and where that was going and what was that trying to prove, but in terms of dealing with corrupt countries, where were the Olympics held?
Good question. I don't remember.
Okay, so here's another question then. Who just bought the PGA?
Saudi Arabia.
Is Saudi Arabia non-corrupt? Is there any corruption in Saudi Arabia?
Okay, I would answer that yes, it is corrupt.
So if you can answer, if you say that it is
corrupt.
corrupt, then how is that?
No,
you said that you can't do business with anywhere that's corrupt. So Saudi Arabia, you already agreed, is corrupt.
United States is also corrupted. All countries are corrupted, but the degree, the way the corruption is played out, or so on, it makes some difference. But if you don't want to make any difference and say all countries are corrupt, that's just fine by me.
Hey, Sasha, hold on a second. Along those same lines, you used the example of the map that you wanted to give and $100 and everything. Sasha, and I'm not saying I would do this because I'm not even saying I have that kind of money, but if I was to go to DC and I wanted to get a certain item and I was to pay them, say $100 or maybe even $1,000, do you think that I could get that item, and would that make the U.S. a corrupt entity?
No, okay, Mark, I understand where you're going with that. I'll tell you one thing. In most cases, not 100%, but most cases, probably 99.5%, it's either you are allowed to have whatever piece of information you're looking for, or you are not. Depends on the regulation. So if regulation says that you are not allowed to get this piece of information, I don't think that $1,000 will help you a lot. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion. Now, if you are allowed to get this information legally, and the person on the other hand is trying to extort from you, say $1,000, $100, whatever it might be, by keeping the money and only then providing you information that you are entitled to. This is a punishable offense, in my opinion. The person has to be really punished for his action. That reminds me exactly what when Trump was first impeachment, he was extorting from Ukrainian government certain following up on Biden and find some kind of sign of corruption or whatever it might be by withholding funds that were already appropriated by Congress. So Trump, it was not even his own funds. It was Congress funds which he already allocated. So it should have gone to Ukraine without any conditions, period. And that's what he said. No, I'm not going to give you the funds until you will give me some dirt on Biden. So this is absolutely incredible crime. And well, he was impeached for that at least.
But Sasha, but hold on a second, Sasha, along those same lines, there are some people, and coming back to our own politics, that would argue that sometimes if people are feeling slighted, that they can use that slight in order to leverage what they want and everything. And I'm gonna give you an example. Apparently DeSantis is not doing that well. He is going to New Hampshire, and the New Hampshire Federation of Republican Women is upset at him for planning an event at the same time as their annual fundraising event. So they're asking him to reschedule, and who knows, they might even be asking him to give a certain amount of money in order to help get their endorsement, since he has done something that they don't like and all in that space. And he's already in trouble in New Hampshire and in the country in general, because I think he's behind by like 25 or 30 points or something along those lines. So would that be a case of maybe somebody manipulating their slight in order to get what they want, which would be the same thing as maybe a corrupt nation, according to the narrative you gave, doing something similar?
Well, you have to separate corruption from outright criminal activities, and many things on, for example, what Trump has done. It's pure criminal activities. There's no corruptions even if there might be elements of corruption, but it's so insignificant compared to what he's done otherwise. So it just no, in my opinion, doesn't make sense even to discuss. The court system will go through all that and will find him.
Now, if you own a building and you abuse the people in your building, because there was definitely accusations in the Trump camp of that being the case, of some of the buildings that he owned that were rental properties, for lack of a better term. So he was an absentee landlord. Now, would that be both criminal and corrupt, or just criminal in the mindset of the way you were describing it? Because it seems to me that that would be a form of corruption as well.
I would prefer that some legal experts would cover that question.
I mean, my whole thing is, no country is clean. As you pointed out, you gave an anecdote about the U.S. and, how Trump was in office and dealing with the corruption there. And similar things. There are tons of countries that we deal with that have have a little bit of corruption here and there. And I understand what you're saying about the degrees and trying to delineate or separate things out that way. But just by leaving a country alone, assuming that China's going to come in or some other country is going to come in and take the risk and deal with the corruption, and then and the U.S. gets to swoop in and save the day because we're pure of heart, and once we get there, all the corruption will disappear. It's not going to happen. So the best bet, I would say, especially dealing with, any company, if that is a untapped resource, tap into that resource. And the more you tap into that resource, you can as a country help that society through diplomacy and everything else that you bring there. Honestly, in a very rudimentary analogy, there's a Japanese animation, aka anime, called Dr. Stone. The whole point of Dr. Stone is that what he is trying to do is, bring science back to, they've been sent back to the Stone Age in a sense, and Dr. Stone is a brilliant individual and remembers all the science and so on and so forth. And he talks about how utilizing the science, even though it's for a separate purpose, is actually helping the villages that are around that they're trying to build. So essentially, the more that we are involved in these areas, and involving our culture or the U.S. culture, that can improve and make our culture more accepted. The less we're involved, another country can come in and demonize the culture that we have and then make it hostile for us to even go there. So I don't see how staying away for 50 years, letting somebody take a chance because, we're afraid to take a chance and we believe that we can come in at the end, helps or improves relations or improves because again, we are in a global market. We are not going back into isolated silos and the U.S. only deals with U.S. individuals or North American individuals. It's impossible. It's a global world. We have the internet now. So we have to find ways to deal with different places. When we complain about China, China's just taking advantage of our downfalls, and they're doing the same thing that we're trying to do essentially. Put in our dollar or our economy or our culture into these places. So we have to figure out ways to, it's like you play chess. I mean, that's the way it is. That's chess, Risk, any video game out there. You have to basically understand the moves that another person's making so we can make it, we can have the advantage on the board that we're playing on.
Hey, Utopian, I know we're winding down and got 5 minutes to go, and I'm probably going to get in trouble if your kill's popping in at the last second and everything. But there may be a double standard in the way that we handle corruption as well, because as y'all were talking, I was thinking that definitely I remember Nicaragua, and Nicaragua was an ally. So even though they were definitely corrupt, we definitely gave them some leeway because they were seen as an ally in South America and all in that space. And I would argue, and Sasha, don't get mad at me, but I would argue that there may be some elements of that in some aspects of what is going on in Ukraine as well. So if corruption is found to exist in that country, is that a different corruption because it is corruption of an ally? And definitely we are an ally with that particular situation because Russia did not
corruption. It's corruption around what that individual country or whatever can offer us.
Right.
For example, we know the whole Saudi situation, yet we still do business with the Saudi government. And also we're allowing the Saudi government to begin to sports wash the things that they've done because of where they are positioned in the global marketplace. If you look at Haiti, if you look at Cuba, they don't offer as much as Saudi Arabia does or those other individual countries. And Shaq, I lean on you in terms of, the amount of money that different countries can, provide other countries and how they're able to get away with particular things because they have that. They have oil, they have resources, they have something. So, I mean, I don't know if you agree or not, but I think you may.
Sorry, because I'm coming in. I haven't actually heard the rest of the conversation. Coming in sort of last moment. But look, I found out something that I thought was very interesting the other day. And I haven't verified that, so somebody can fact check it for me. But I haven't verified it yet. But I heard something the other day that 30% of the world's economy comes from countries that are under sanction at the moment. And I think that's a really interesting point because we talk about the BRICS nations, for example, becoming much more powerful and forming their own alliance. Well, why wouldn't they if they can't trade with us? And when we have a look at what some of the criticisms that we have of some countries, and we have a look at what we turn a blind eye to with countries that are either our allies or are strategically important to us, it is absolutely hypocritical. Of course it is. But on that same token, we hear sort of Republicans at the moment, and Democrats would say this as well a lot of the time, but Republicans at the moment are saying things like, well, we don't want to be going into countries and using our military to interfere with other countries. And Democrats will often say things like, we shouldn't be in the business of nation building. And you sort of go, well, hang on a minute. Do we care about human rights? Just on that one issue, right? Human rights. Do we care about human rights and we're going to stamp out human rights abuses wherever we see it? Or do we not? And are we going to turn a blind eye when a country is strategically beneficial to us and then crucify countries where it's not strategically beneficial to us? Is that what we're going to do? Because if it is what we're going to do, we should actually admit that and get off our high horse because we are in no place to pass judgment on the morality of other countries if we, sitting in the West, especially Five Eyes, are going to turn a blind eye to things and even do those things ourselves, then we're in no place to lecture any other country on morality. That's my view. And I think it's probably one of the rare times that Toby and I are going to fully agree on something on the show.
I mean, yeah, it would be nice to, put that out there. I mean, and under it, for example, like our dealings with Saudi Arabia, it'd be nice to say why because one of the problems that we run into always is a lack of communication and a lack of understanding and a lack of, because our society has gotten to this bumper sticker mentality where if you can put it on a bumper sticker, we believe it instantly. It's perfect. And we've lost the understanding of nuance and understanding of really what the world is.
And I think the problem with Tony is that we as in us in the West have gone down to the bumper sticker mentality, because relatively speaking, our worst problems are not that bad in comparison to what people around the world are going through. So we reduce things down to bumper stickers and political slogans, but other people aren't doing that in other countries, because it could be the difference between them being able to feed their kids or not. It could be the difference between life and death for some of them. And so the issues are so much more complicated. And because we're reducing things down to these bumper stickers, we are unable or unwilling to actually have proper conversations about international affairs and the affairs that affect the domestic politics of countries that are foreign to us. And on that, I think we're actually at the hour mark.
Yeah, we're at the hour, so it's time to end. It's time for the economic show. Definitely, I was thinking about those bumper stickers and getting ready to get out of here, because I was thinking about, and we can talk about this on tomorrow, like Make America Great or Hope or WWJD, What Would Jesus Do? And all in that space. And a lot of times those are very simplistic in some ways, bumper stickers, and can have some very deep meanings, but oftentimes they are very narrow meanings as well. And on that note, we're going to get out of here and we can discuss those bumper stickers on tomorrow's show.